All right. Uh, Welcome everyone to the 38th Virtual Roundtable on Measuring Corruption. Um, I am Joseph Pochgay Alvarez, and I am delighted to be hosting today a presentation by Martin Benderson and Ignacio Kantor, who are here with us. They are officials at the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. And I'm quite thrilled of finally having been able to book them for the roundtable because I've been following their work for quite some time. And when I heard about a year or so ago that they had been collecting data on incidents of corruption as reported by their member organizations, I immediately was quite curious about the nature and the features of that database, and also, of course, how researchers such as us could employ it for our work. And mea culpa, it did take me quite a while to reach out to them and to organize this, but it seems that this is also a perfect timing to start talking about this type of corruption as the transnational aspect of it continues to grow in importance and relevance. Uh, so for those of you who are here with us for the first time, although the majority of you are, of course, regulars already in this series, um, I just want to remind you of the format. So this meeting will last 90 minutes. In the call, it was structured as 45 minutes for the presentation and 45 minutes for Q&A. In reality, we mix the two of them. So if you have any questions or comments during the presentation, please don't be shy. Just raise your hand either through the emoji or visually, and I'll invite you to unmute yourself. Okay? Other than that, I ask you to please keep your microphones muted, and if you have to go out and come back, be sure to keep the Microsoft muted as well. One last thing, whenever you wish to ask a question or comment, well, the first time, uh, please, if you could also say a couple of things about yourself, so your affiliation, your area of expertise or work, that would make it also very interesting for the rest of us that are looking forward to opportunities to collaborate in issues of measurement of corruption. All right. So that's it from me at this beginning of the session. I leave the floor to Ignacio and Martin. Uh, you are free to start sharing your presentation whenever you're ready. And of course, if you could also introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization, that would be great.
Yes, there you go. Thanks so much for the introduction, Joseph, and for the opportunity to be here today. Let me start by sharing my slides. Right. Yes, so we were really excited to be invited to speak about the data that we have in the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network and how we used data as a way to really drive change in the maritime sector and combat corruption in various ways. So what we've done is we prepared a bit of an agenda here for you, and we're gonna walk through primarily 4 topics. We will start with a introduction of who we are and how we work. I think that could be interesting as it also relates on how we use the data. Then we'll go into more of a deep dive on our anonymous incident data, how that data is being reported, and also how we visualize and use that data for various purposes. Then we're going to discuss our integrity scorecards and the system we have to assess integrity performance of ports worldwide and government authorities. And we're going to give you a sneak peek of how that system looks and how we also use that in our engagement with governments and also the private sector. Then finally, we also wanted to say a few words about the anti-corruption help desk that MACN has put in place, which is a non-anonymous data source, but we'll tell you more about that. After each of these sections, we have also set aside some time for questions, but I think as Joseph said in the beginning, it's really good if you also, of course, ask questions as we go in the chat, but it would be good to also maybe pause after each of these sections so we have some time to reflect and make sure you're following what we're saying. Before diving into this further, I would also like to introduce myself and also my colleague. So starting with myself, my name is Martin Benderson. I've been with the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network for the past 10 years, overseeing and also implementing many of the initiatives where we have collaborations with both the public and the private sector in ports worldwide. And in terms of data, I've been part of managing our data system and also part of developing our most recent development on integrity scorecards and then what we call the Global Port Integrity Platform. I'm also really pleased to have my colleague Ignacio joining me here today. Ignacio, a few words of introductions from you. Thank you.
Yes, of course. Hi, everyone. Thanks again, Joseph. Nice to meet you all. Yeah, I'm Ignacio. I have joined MACN last year. I'm leading the strategy and projects related to data and the tools that our members have access to in order to get through their compliance journey. Those projects, yeah, are the ones that I lead mainly.
Thanks for that. And you'll hear more from Ignacio when we discuss our data system reporting and so on. Let's kick off and let me say a few words about who we are. The Maritime Anti-Corruption Network has been around for almost 15 years, actually. It was established back in 2011. And we are a global business network working towards a vision of a maritime industry free of corruption. This is a private sector initiative. It started with a small group of shipping companies, about 10 of them, who back in 2011 wanted to take a collective action against corruption in the industry, in the supply chain, but also the corruption that they saw in the interaction with public officials. And the kind of corruption that they primarily were concerned about was the corruption that occurs as ships pass into ports worldwide. So as a ship enters a port, there's a number of inspections that needs to happen. On average, you have 7 government players who needs to clear the ship. And this has nothing to do with cargo. This is just the ship. So you can imagine as you go to the airport and you get your security checked and passport and so on, similar things has to happen for the ship. It has to happen for the crew. And these 7 government agencies need to make sure that, yeah, passports are in order, the ship itself is in good standing and so forth. And unfortunately, over time and over many decades, we've seen that these inspections are also involved requests for corrupt payments, cigarettes, bottles of alcohol, and all kinds of things. It's been a ingrained practice in the industry, both from the private and the public sector, to give out small gifts, cigarettes, alcohol, and so forth. But we also, of course, seen other more severe instances of extortions and larger cash demands that are required to just enter or exit the port, really. So this is just to give a small glimpse of how corruption looks like in the sector. But you can imagine as a crew, this has a detrimental impact on your work environment. It leads to humiliation. It leads to stress. And for the company itself, corruption of this kind can also have severe consequences in terms of prosecutions, investigations, and so forth. So there's really a number of reasons why companies wanted to take action. I think what was one of the key reasons at the time was probably the UK Bribery Act, because the UK Bribery Act made facilitation payments illegal. And you could face some severe consequences if you, as a company, did pay even cigarettes to public officials. And you can imagine the shipping industry seeing this legislation for the first time and realizing we're all going to be criminalized because this is how the sector works, essentially. You give out cigarettes and sometimes you give out even more things. So there was a number of reasons, but from a compliance and legal perspective, there was a need for a collective action platform. And for those of you familiar with the UK Bribery Act, you know that collective action is an adequate procedure. So a collective action platform was one of the measures that these 10 companies decided to put in place. And that eventually became the MACN, the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network. And we have grown into a full-fledged membership organization. We have 220 companies in this network, and we have a fairly global coverage. I'll show you on the next slide what we cover. Ignacio and I, we work for the Secretariat. We're based here in Copenhagen, but we operate globally, so to speak. When it comes to our membership and the kind of companies that are part of this initiative, it's essentially all companies that deal with a ship. And you can see here on the supply chain, this could be interesting for those of you who are not too familiar with shipping. You have someone who charters the ship. So this could be an oil major, someone owning the cargo. You have someone owning the ship. You have another company managing the ship. You may have also another company crewing the ship sometimes. In the actual port you're calling, you have a port agent, which is a local, usually SME, who needs to be part of the clearance procedures. And then finally, you head into a terminal, which could also be a private sector player or government. So you can see already here, you have a number of players involved, and all of these are accepted into our membership. On the right-hand side, you also have a number of service providers and other players in this supply chain that we also include. For example, those who insure the ship and those who insure sometimes the cargo as well, including also the flag registry. So the idea behind the initiative is to have the entire supply chain, the supply chain of shipping and the supply chain of those dealing with the ship represented as a way to address corruption systematically across the supply chain. Joseph, you have a question?
Yes, Martin. Sorry for starting so early. But I was curious because you mentioned the UK Bribery Act and of course launching MACN in 2011. Of course, there is it's temporality there. But because you guys are based in Copenhagen and this is a global network, I wonder if you just mentioned the UK Bribery Act as an example, whereas the FCPA and the French law, for example, they are also relevant to the activities of your member organizations. Could you perhaps just clarify this relation to the different legislation of different countries?
Yeah, I think the key thing with the UK Bribery Act, first, I think it was the first legislation that made FPs illegal in that sense. So if you look at FCPA, it doesn't talk about facilitation payments. Of course, if you influence foreign politicians or public officials, then of course you get into trouble also with the FCPA. But what was very clear in the new Anti-Bribery Act in the UK was that you cannot give out these FPs, and that will be counted as a bribe, essentially. It's a foreign bribe. So I think from a legal perspective, that was new, and that was triggered action. And from my understanding is also that the French law came a bit later, if I'm not incorrect. So the 10 players in the beginning, that was lawyers. So there was compliance officers sitting in a room and saying, okay, how should we do this? We have captains, we have operations team, we have the port agents, we have a supply chain. How will we get them to actually change their behavior, And they saw the legal ramification or potential risks of this. So I think that would be my answer. And then the UK is important because it's extraterritorial legislation and shipping touches UK. I mean, UK is a shipping country in many ways, and you also have touch points with the UK. Looking at insurance clubs and others where you go to the UK for those services. So it's very hard to also avoid UK as a shipping company in that sense.
Thank you. That's certainly very clarifying. And another reason that I wanted to ask that question as well is because, of course, you heard recently there have been changes about the enforcement or the intention to enforce the FCPA in the US. And there's a little bit of a panic among members of the compliance community about the ramifications of that for private organizations. So it's really welcome to hear about the impact that, for example, the UK Bribery Act also had independently of what the US was doing. So I mean, and perhaps this is something that we can talk about towards the end of the presentation, but because it's more towards the future. So if you want, you can just reserve the question for later. But I wonder if you have also heard any because the EFPs is more connected to the situation in the UK. I wonder if these changes in that level of enforcement in the US is just mostly not important for the type of activity that the MACN engages with, or perhaps actually it is something that at the very least you guys want to keep track of.
Yeah, no, I think it's something we're tracking. We haven't seen the consequences yet. I mean, of course, there's a risk here that companies start leaving this initiative. We've been growing every year since we started, and it's been, I would say, fairly easy to actually recruit companies to this initiative. They see the relevance. So I think we have to assess if people actually think this is not relevant anymore. But my assessment from working with these companies that the legal angle is actually less important these days, since we also work so much with operations and those who sit with the ships and want to get them in and out of the port. So we help them actually do their job better by supporting them to have less time in the port, pay no bribes, for example. So the captain themselves, they would appreciate this initiative not from a legal standpoint, but more from an operational standpoint, that there's someone to support them. So I think that would be my assessment for now, at least. But I have to come back next year, I think.
No, fair enough. Great. And I think that's a great segue to continue with the presentation towards the incident system. Yeah.
Yeah, no, good. I think we can skip ahead just to say that we have a global network. This is just a map of all the players. I can share this afterwards. We cover about a quarter of the global tonnage at sea with these members. So still a way to go, although we have a quite large membership spanning the entire sector. We eliminate corruption by doing essentially three things. Firstly, we try to address, let's say, the supply side of corruption by working with the private sector to build capacity and set expectations on what's an acceptable standard for a compliance program in the shipping industry. So we have 7 principles, anti-corruption principles, again, based on the UK Bribery Act, but also based on many other international legislations, where companies are expected to implement these principles in their compliance standards internally, how they deal with third parties, how they train their staff, and so on. They get benchmarked every year against their peer. They get a score, and they can see, am I behind or am I ahead of the pack as a company? So this is a way to really measure their progress in their anti-corruption compliance journey or their programs internally, but also to put certain incentives and pressure on the companies to improve. Because if we do not see improvement over 2 years, we have the option to kick out companies if we don't think they are genuine about actually improving their capability building or their capacity in the compliance space. And that has happened in the past. It has been a few examples, but that's very important. And we also use, of course, a carrot here. We provide training tools for companies. We provide tailor-made training for captains and all the supply chain players. We provide risk tools and so on. So the idea is you get tools from MACN and then you build your compliance programs to put it in a better place, essentially, with our support. Then if we just jump down to collaboration, this is essentially about policy advocacy. We have an ambition to really advocate for more ambitious standards and regulation when it comes to anti-corruption in the shipping sector. One of our key achievements have been the engagement with the International Maritime Organization in London, which is a UN body regulating shipping. And a couple of years ago, they issued their first ever guidance and recommendations on how to fight corruption in the port and maritime sector for member state, government authorities, and also the industry. So that's one example of how we want to advocate for change on the regulatory arena. And then the final thing we do is collective action, where we really try and let's say address the demand side of corruption by engaging externally, engaging in ports and in countries where we see a lot of challenges with corruption, because obviously we can't just deal with companies in the private sector and improve their standards. Corruption will still prevail and exist. So we need to be active in the hotspots around the world where we really see challenges with corruption in ports. And this is the countries where we currently operate. It's about more than 10 countries where we have initiatives. These initiatives are usually run by a local partner, civil society, a legal expert, depending a bit on the nature of the initiative. And then we work in partnership with the government, the authorities in the port, such as immigration, customs, port authority, quarantine, and law enforcement, and also various supply chain players. Could be local SMEs, could also often be multinationals, and trying to make the link between the multinationals in our network and the local SMEs in the country and connect them to align expectations, standards on how you actually reject and say no to corruption in these countries. This is often funded externally. We have about 50% of our funding from the members. That is private sector money. We have another 50% coming in from international donors. Yeah, used to be USAID, but unfortunately no longer. We have the Danida money from Denmark. We have worked with the UK and a number of also private foundations and so on. So that's quite essential to keep these initiatives alive. A segue into the next discussion is the data here, which is coming up. Why are we working in these countries? I think the data is key here. We have this anonymous reporting system that we had for more than 10 years, where any player in the industry can report an incident of corruption. They face corruption, and we get that data, and we can see where hotspots appear, because this is more than 10 years of data. And that allows us also to get a priority or understand where should we focus. Is it the upriver ports in Argentina that is the problem, or is it rather the Pacific ports in Chile, for example? And you get fairly granular details on that, and that's an indication of where we see risks, of course. Another factor that really decides where we go is also where the industry is prepared to drive change. Because this is a private sector initiative, we would not engage in a country if the industry and our members are not prepared to be part of the solution. So that's kind of key. You need to have a few players, doesn't have to be many, but to come to us and say, let's change something in Bangladesh. Let's do that. We have really a mandate now from our senior leadership to change certain things here, and we need a collective action platform. Can you help us with that? And then, of course, other things we assess is of course, the feasibility of actually driving change. So some countries are more difficult than others, as you can imagine. But let me stop here. I think there's one more question before we continue to the data part.
Yes, we have a question from David. David, go ahead.
Yes. Thank you very much for the presentation. I just want to know if there is a specific reason why the membership is still 46, is there a specific reason why countries are not joining? And is membership at country level, or at maybe through civil society, or any non-state group?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So membership is actually only open for private sector. So this is an industry initiative, and the 46 countries here refers to the head office of our members. And you can see where the dots are here. We have a quite big footprint in Europe and Asia, some in West Africa and so on. But that said, many of these companies that operate globally. So if you look at all the container liners, they have offices across the world. So the 46 is essentially just a representation of head office. And the coverage is larger than that, if that answers your question.
Thank you.
Do you have any other? There was some shots here, no? Anything else? Okay. Any other questions on the introduction before we head into the more data section? No?
I think we're good for now.
Okay, so let's have a look then at the anonymous data incident database. Over to you, Ignacio.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So yeah, this is where our data flow starts. We have this anonymous reporting system that Martin talked about already, through which any private company, not only our members, but as it's anonymous, it's totally open, so anyone can report incidents of corruption, unethical demands that they had to leave, and they can do it in a single way or multiple way. this means that they can report one single incident that happened, or they can maybe a lot of companies have their own internal reporting mechanisms, and they report it internally, and then once a month or once a quarter, they upload these bulk incidents to our system. Reporting is part of MACN's principle, and it's actually one of the members' commitment when they join MACN as part of their compliance journey to implement a reporting mechanism. And of course, we want that data. We want them to share that data with us. In this way, they could have access not only to their own data and see a small part of the problem, but they can also see what's happening at an industry level and in the full supply chain, and then can benchmark their experiences and events with the rest of the peers. So that's super important. Why is it that we start with this data? So mainly for three reasons. First, this data helps us give maritime corruption the visibility that it deserves as a problem worldwide. And in second place, it helps us, of course, to understand better the nature of the issue and to find these patterns and trends Martin was talking about, and to really be able to grasp the nuances in also regionally and also in different periods of time. So in that sense, it helps us a lot to approach the problem with more information. And third reason why data is important for us, of course, has to be with engagement of relevant stakeholders, both private and public sector. So we definitely use this data to engage them and to sit with the right people when we need to approach these collective actions, for example, or to sit down with governments or port authorities. So that's also a very important part. As the name says, it's an anonymous reporting system, so we are really careful with the governance of this data. Here we included this small list of things that the report has to include and what not to disclose. It's important for us that it's totally anonymous, so of course we ask for information about the nature of the demand, where it happened, the port, the stakeholders involved, only like what kind of agency was involved in that, and the nature of the demand itself. But of course, we ask not to disclose the identity of who's reporting or the company that it's reporting, the identity that could disclose who the demandant was or the vessel. So it's important for us. It's really a very sensitive data. And imagine, of course, if we want companies to share this data with us, that's an important aspect. It was not easy from the beginning to go to all of these lawyers in these big companies and ask them to share corruption incident data with us. So after many years, of course, we gain their trust that by being really careful on how we treat the data and what kind of data we are asking for. Yeah, there's a question, Julia, I think.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the presentation. What I understand from this reporting incident system, just the companies can report, or can individuals from the company that is part of MACN report as well? And also, if you do any kind of benchmarking with or comparison with, assuming that these companies have their own whistleblowing system, if you can compare at some point incidents reported within the company and what has been reported to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Regarding the first question, of course, again, it's anonymous. Anyone can report. We have different type of reporters. It can be directly the captain who had to go through an unethical demand like this. Usually the seafarers are the one reporting directly through our system, or if they have their own internal mechanism in the company, they report it internally, and then usually it's a compliance person, for example, in charge of uploading all the different incidents. Please, Martin, feel free to add whatever you feel like.
Yeah, I think on the second question, in terms of looking at whistleblower data, I haven't heard exactly about whistleblower data being used, but what companies would use this data is to take, let's say, a country risk assessment. So I had a recent example of a company who has offices in Indonesia, and they asked their local office to do a risk assessment. So what's the risk in Indonesia? And they come back with a fairly, let's say, medium risk assessment, where the head office was not very convinced that this is actually the situation in Indonesia. So then they took our data and said, look, well, if you go to Indonesia and look at MACN data, there's this many incidents, and we really don't think it's a medium risk. Can we just compare our data or your risk assessment with this data? So that's one example of how they can maybe sometimes challenge or get to more precise risk assessment by combining their own data with our data, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's just to add something. Yeah, we see many examples of companies. Of course, they have their own data from their own experiences, and then they use the network's data with us to compare with what's going on with their peers and to benchmark. Of course, many of the companies benchmark their own data with the network's data, so that's also important.
Ignacio, so if I can ask another question as well, potentially connected to the one Julia had. Just so I understand exactly how this works in real life. So I assume the access to the reporting system is only available to the member companies, right? Or it's...
No, Joseph. Yeah, I can show you, but directly if you go to macn.dk, our main homepage, there on the first homepage, there's directly an access to report an incident. So anyone can access. That's public. As it's anonymous, it's totally open. It's not only for our members. That's also the idea that we could also get data from outside our network and strengthen this data set, of course.
Oh, that's very interesting. So that means that potentially you can also receive reports from countries where no member organization actually operates.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, one of the questions that is totally optional to answer asks if the company is a member or not of MACN. That's just, we use it internally. We don't disclose that, but we know, of course, that we have data from outside our network. It could be, for example, the case of seafarers rotating in companies, and they know through their one of the companies that are a member of MACN, and they get used to reporting. So then they are in another company, in another vessel, and they experience something similar, so they report. So yes, we have, of course, it's not the majority from what we see in the data. The majority of the data comes from members because they are more aware about this. But yes, we do have from outside the network.
Excellent, thank you. Samuel?
Hi, everyone. So my question was actually similar to the one of Joseph. I was wondering if the data was also being shared with public companies and not just with private companies, or with public actors. So I understand the data is public, so actually anyone could access it. And then the other question I had was in terms of the consequence of the incident that is being reported, do you also ask if there's any report being done to public authorities? Is there any follow-up in terms of the incident? As in, is there any public action undertaken to deal with the incident? Thank you.
Let me answer, and please, Martin, again, if you have anything to add. But regarding the first question, maybe Yeah, maybe I was a little bit not too clear in this. The data is not public. What is public is the reporting form, so the reporting tool. So anyone can report freely, but this data, it's only shared within the network. This is mainly, of course, for the sensitivity nature of this data. Now I'm gonna go a little bit in the next slide maybe about this and what we do with data and how we use it. But to make it clear, anyone can report, but not anyone can access the data. In conclusion.
And have you ever received a request from a country to share the data?
Yeah. Martin, do you want to answer this one? That maybe you've been.
Yes. I mean, we share it with all our collaborating partners and governments and so on. But the challenge we have is that we can't publicize the data because it would have consequences for our local partners, NGOs on the ground. It would have consequences for the companies in the countries because they are affiliated to us. So we have a number of cases where government comes and they threaten companies to delicense them. They threaten our partner to delicense when our data have been publicized in various ways, because we have done some glimpse of the data and government take offense. And that's not what we do. We don't spend time on managing governments like that. We really want to drive change. So that's a conscious decision. We don't publicize it, but we do share it when there is trust, when there is collaboration, then we have open the gates to the data through dashboards and so on with government and others.
Diana?
And in terms of the second question on investigation, I think we can come back to that. We don't investigate this data, but we have an anti-corruption help desk where we do full investigation and also resolution. So I think for this data, there's no other actions taken in terms of investigation and so on, but there's another mechanism for that. So we're coming back to that question.
Hi, thanks for the excellent presentation. It's really interesting, the system you use. I'm Diana from UNCTAD, UN Trade and Development, and also you may know it because of ASICUDA, custom procedures software that kind of helps systematize or automate the transaction data to reduce also corruption and as a positive effect. My question is regarding the demand. What is exactly that? And if there is a possibility to provide, even without disclosing any confidential data, provide information regarding what is exactly the bribe, if the bribe has been asked or a bribe is being required by some official from the private company, maybe to port authorities, because I understand there are different sources or motivation that someone can ask for a bribe in the port. Can be related to misinvoicing from the company, or can be related to petty corruption, so corrupt bribe that is being requested by the port authority to, for example, issue the custom clearance. And just to understand a little bit what type of form of corruptions is behind that.
Yeah. Shall we move to the next slide, Ignacio, because I think you have it there.
Yeah, maybe it makes sense. Yeah, or the next one. But yeah, we can do this one because in the following one, I'm going to show you a little bit about the data. To answer really quickly, the demand is what was like the item that was actually demanded. Was it cash? Was it large cash payment or small ones? Was it cigarette, drinks? We even have options because we know that's all became a normal practice. So we are actually asking what was the item that was demanded. That was for the first quick question. And then
okay, sorry. And you presume that this is like the authorities are demanding for a bribe, or is it both ways? So because like UNODC has like a corruption questionnaire, and they distinguish, for example, in the questionnaire, whether the person is being asked for a bribe or is offering a bribe. So I just wonder if this is possible to distinguish based on this data.
Yeah, this is all the demands, right? So we're focusing on what we call demands, and they can be explicit or implicit, that you know nothing is moving unless you give something, and oftentimes there's an expectation that is not explicit, but we capture details on what is the amounts being asked and what's the consequences and what's the situation like, you know. So we have some details there on those things, but we don't have any incidents on offers of bribes, like private sector offering a bribe to speed up the queue, because that would require often that we have data from the public sector, and this is actually private sector data if you see how the transactions are going in the port there. But that's of course also really interesting to have, but unfortunately we don't have that.
Yeah. Of course, yeah, I was gonna add that as Martin said, like we are primarily focused on that interaction when the vessel gets to port and it needs to be cleared and inspected, and that's where the corruption opportunity arises, and it's usually from a public. Here we included a definition of what is an incident for us, and what these kind of incidents are reported when a public official or a third party demands cash or items not intended to be consumed on board the vessel, just to make sure we're not talking about hospitality things, or when they issued unjustified fine or threatens the safety of the ship or the crew. That's a definition that we use as an incident, and that's what's being reported. Yeah, there's a question.
Julia?
Yeah, maybe I have missed this information, but do you also consider private to private corruption, or just when there is a public official involved? I mean, I am thinking about all of these stakeholders and all these parties that intervene in your chain, if maybe even, I don't know, if there is any kind of control of this as well. Thank you.
Yeah, Martin, because you know some examples.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reporting of private to private bribery, especially port agents, which is the intermediary between the public and the private. That's the interface. It's the port agent. So many companies report the port agent, which means that they believe the port agent is somehow colluding or at least taking bribes on their behalf. But business-to-business bribery is of course less of a concern if you have your legal hat on, because it's not illegal in some jurisdiction. Just to be very cynical here, but that's how sometimes reality is. But it's being reported. It's a frustration that you don't trust your business partner, and that's also why we have the initiative that you need to build that relationship through MACN with trustworthy partners.
Yeah, we also have tried to. Yeah, we also work with due diligence tools for private in the supply chain. I think there's one more question there.
Yes, Salome?
Thank you, Joseph. Good morning. I'm Salome Flores from UNODC. Super interesting experience. We don't see this kind of efforts coming from the private sector. Really, congratulations for this effort. My question is if you have some sort of indications of normalization of the data. I mean, I understand that this is the aggregates of incidents per country and incidents by port, but do you have any rate to kind of compare? Because I guess the Suez Canal in Egypt is one of the ports with the highest number of shipments crossing by. So I'm just wondering if you have any kind of analysis that allows to see comparisons. Thank you. Over.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, that's the magic indicator that we want. We want to know exactly the number of ships going into the port, and we want to know exactly how many corrupt incidents are happening per ship or something like that. And we've been working with some of the data providers like Marine Traffic and buying data on number of port calls, comparing that with our data to see if we can get an indicator. And we have failed every time. And one of the reasons is that exactly what I mentioned in the beginning, that you have 6 stakeholders coming in just in one ship, to check for things. So it could easily be 6 requests for a bribe just for one single ship. And then you compare that with the data on port calls, which is one ship, So all immediately you get into trouble on how you're actually going to compare this. So what we use to compare ports is to say, is this a large, medium, small size port? How much traffic is it coming? And then you can take that data and to some extent not compare apple and pears, but apple and apples, right? But to compare ports side by side, I mean, it could be interesting, but it's not telling you the whole story, I think. You need to dig deeper to really see the root cause and what's driving corruption, because it's so different depending on where you go. So this is kind of a glimpse. It's a first snapshot, but it's not the whole story, so to speak.
Yeah, that's why also usually we don't focus on rankings as such to compare the things, but maybe analyzing one port, how it changed in time, what's the nature of the demand, which kind of stakeholders should we engage with to go and speak and sit down in the table. It's more that kind of thing, that getting rankings and person, because also, as we've been talking about, being this data from anonymous sources, that's also something that could be questioned at some point, and that we had questions about it, of course, people questioning. So we take all of the information, and now we're gonna go through a little bit more in the data and other sources of data as well. But there are all many different layers that we use to understand the problem better, what's going on in each region, in each port, and then being able to approach the right people. But it's not that we take this, any number like this for granted, and you can say, okay, the corruption is 3.4. We don't do that kind of thing. It's more to understand the issue holistically. If we go a little bit, okay, yes, we have more than 65,000 incidents reporting for the time being in more than 1,300 ports. This is it's fine, Martin. It's fine. Yeah, we can show that's a glimpse of what our data.
Sorry to interrupt. Yes. We have another question from Samuel and then from myself, but if that's okay.
Yeah, of
Great.
course.
Thank you. No, it's all very interesting. I'm wondering, the incidents that you have seen, are they like all kind of separate incidents, or do you start to see patterns, as in there is systematic corruption in the port and it's actually organized and it's actually a way of sucking funds out of the shipping industry to line the pockets of some powerful heavyweights in the country? Like, because I mean, I used to work as the regional anti-corruption advisor in Senegal, responsible for West and Central Africa. And I know for sure the port in Senegal, for example, was quite an organized place to generate corrupt funds. I think there's a new regime in place now, so maybe under the new leadership, they want to address it. And since you're working with Senegal, I was also wondering. So yeah, I was wondering about patterns and this system behind it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Samuel. Yeah, that's really interesting what you are bringing. Definitely, this data gives us patterns and expose systemic corruption in different ways. Actually, yeah, Martin will tell you about a specific case afterwards that also we could uncover thanks to the data. But yes, there are many systematic events that we can getting insight from the data. Of course, we have also separate individual events going on all over the world, but patterns like that, yeah, it's very common that we can identify from the data, for sure.
Obi, do you have a question? Obi, hello.
Yes, yeah. Joseph, thank you so much. Yeah, thank you, Martin and Ignacio. This is very interesting. This is Obi. I'm speaking from Nigeria. I just wanted to find out, since the data is not made public, is there like maybe annual reports that you share to the public, that points out, the lows and highs of your work, within the countries that you work in terms of, corrupt practices within the port spaces. Then secondly, I looked at the Nigerian map in MACN, and I know my country is actually, I was also expecting what is on the website, where it says MACN identified Nigeria as one of the most challenging countries to do business in corrupt demands. How far so far have you been able to resolve some of the critical issues in terms of corrupt practices within the port? Because I cannot tell you, no, they did not exist, within the port in Nigeria, because I'm a Nigerian and I know what kind of thing that do happen. And I work from the CSO part of corrupt practices in Nigeria. So I just wanted to get your views on on the situation so far in Nigeria? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think if I can take the first question, we don't have an annual report, but we do have studies and risk assessments coming out. We actually had a recent study on the cost of corruption in Nigeria, so that connects maybe to your two questions, looking at some of this data. So there's no data set being fed out to the public, but we do have sometimes collaboration with researchers or partners who take this data for a certain agenda we want to drive change on and so on. For Nigeria, we've been there for 12 years. We're going to talk more about Nigeria later in the presentation, but we see a lot of progress. It's really our flagship project, both on what the government had done, but also how the industry now is really working hand in hand with government to resolve corruption. That's through our anti-corruption help desk. But I can speak more about that when we come further on in the presentation, and we can also follow up with more data or reports on our work in Nigeria, because it's probably one of our richest initiatives we have. If that's okay.
There are also a couple of questions here in the chat. I will group both of them because they refer to aspects or features of the template for companies to report. One of them is concerning if there is information about bribes related to vessels coming in rather than leaving the country, so the direction in which they're moving. And the second one is in terms of the type of commodities that they're moving or that are related to these incidents.
Yeah, I think for the first one, it's yes, it could be either way, right? Often there are problems when you come in, because then you're on a tight schedule, and it's a good situation to extort bribes when you have a big ship who needs to offload that cargo. So many of the incidents are coming in, but also exiting sometimes, cleaning your vessel, and then you have to get permission to leave, and then there's also another hassle. So it's a bit of both, leaving and coming into the port. Commodities, you can see here in the vessel type column on the screen here, you have bulk, you have tanker, you have car carriers. That's a glimpse of what's in the ship, of course. We can't say whether it's oil or whether it's food oil or petroleum, for example, or asphalt, but we know at least what kind of segment there is. And bulk can be many things, and then you have containers that can be all kinds of things, right? But we can definitely assess and see different challenges depending on what type of vessel you're using. I mean, it's related to how the shipping market works. Container is much more on a set schedule, while you have bulk and tankers working on the spot market. And then you have more commercial incentives to go fast in and out of a port, for example. And then you're more vulnerable to corruption, because you have that set schedule to essentially call the port and so on. So that's something we see in the data.
Great. Before we move on with the presentation, because I also had a question connected to the one that Salome asked. So of course, Salome's question was related to, if we can we could normalize the data based on the traffic that different ports received. I was also wondering if there's something to be said concerning the supply side of the data. So the companies. Have there been any way of estimating the degree to which these member organizations under different chiefs and captains and et cetera, are aware of the existence of this report mechanism?
I can go a little bit with that one. With all of this data, we capture the demand side of the incidents. That would mainly, Martin, if you want to deal a little bit more on the legal impliance of this, but getting all of this evidence, if we would get information of if the bribe was done or not, what happened finally with that demand, of course, that could have legal implications for sure. So we are only always focusing on the demand side. Maybe that's Martin, if you can expand a little, because this also has to be with the beginnings of this data, right?
Oh, sorry, I actually meant in terms of because this information is to be submitted by private sector companies, right? So I'm wondering if the majority of the members of MACN are aware, sufficiently well informed about the existence of this platform, so that they can inform they can submit the reports. As a way also to estimate if the number of reports in different parts is just because of the amount of potential risk of corruption that exists in those different ports, or may also be associated with some companies or some types of companies being more willing to or familiarized with this type of reporting.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. I mean, we kind of assume that this is just a fraction of all data out there. Those reporting are usually members, and they, I mean, it's skewed in the sense that they are members of MACN, that they call certain ports, and not the entire industry is reporting this data, right? And then those companies with ethical practices in place or good compliance standards, they may report, while those who don't have that, they would probably not report this, you know. So awareness, I think, is fairly high on the membership. It's an expectation to report, and everybody should have reporting systems in place. So the membership knows about the system. Some use the data and so on, but we're still just a small fraction of the entire sector. You saw the 24% in my beginning of the presentation. So there's so many data here that we don't know about, and we have membership. You know, we have less membership in Latin America. So then there's less data in Latin America. And that's also how we work. If we want to drive change in Brazil, we need Brazilian members. And right now we don't have that, you know, so we can't really work in Brazil. So it's kind of goes hand in hand, right, with the data and action approach, if it makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. No, that makes it clear.
Should we continue? Maybe.
Yes, I don't see any more questions here for the time being.
Okay. Okay. Do you wanna go with the next one, Martin?
Yeah, I think this is me. Yes, just to say, I mean, just to connect to the questions about systemic corruption. I mean, the data here, of course, there's a lot of cigarettes and petty corruption, but there's clearly very systemic corruption that we also see and identify through this data set. One of the examples is Argentina. 10 years ago, we saw that the largest cash demands in the whole data set were in a few upriver ports in Argentina who were exporting grains. And that, of course, caught our attention. We started talking to the bulk segment, which is the ones interested in other exporting grains on their vessels. And they all recognize that this has been going on for years. You know, when you go to Argentina, you need to pay at least $10,000 to get a clean cargo holds report from the government inspectors. So we looked at the data. We hired a local partner in Argentina to do a root cause assessment. What's really driving this and who's involved? And the short answer was that everybody is involved. It was sanctioned all the way up to government and so on. And all business players were playing a role, partly because they benefited, but also partly because they didn't have a choice. This was how the business was run, and it was very systemic for decades. So what we did there was to establish a collective action with the parliament, the agencies in the port, on the government side, but also on the private sector side. We had the international supply chain, so international ship owners. We had the port agents, the local SMEs. We recruited them into MACN. And we also involved the export organization, those exporting grains out of Argentina. And we all together worked to reform these inspection procedures and also the integrity in the port. So it took us 3 years, starting in 2014. And by 2017, we have passed this law in the parliament in Argentina, and we've also implemented a number of new integrity standards in the port on these inspections. And we saw a 90% drop in these cash demands through these reforms. And this corruption scheme was worth about $30 million a year, which was money paid primarily by international ship owners. But it was also hitting the insurance industry, because you can imagine that insurance get involved when you have these claims, right? So there was an intricate system here of local and public, private, and then also multinationals insurance that was kind of keeping this alive, voluntarily and involuntarily, I must say. But by working together and reforming this in Argentina, we really changed the tide here. And we have seen a really dramatic increase or decrease and an improvement in Argentina over the years. Now with the new government, we have some indication that things are not going in the right direction. So that's not very good. But overall, we see this as a good story to see how you really can identify systemic corruption, and also by taking action in the country using collective action, you can drive down these numbers, and you can use the numbers also to monitor what's going on in Argentina. Are we successful, and so on. We don't use this data only. We also, of course, have discussions with members. We speak to partners in Argentina to really get a sense of what's happening there. Is corruption on the rise again? Are the corrupt inspectors coming back to the port? You know, so trying to really monitor and see how can we maintain the good progress and we had. So this is what you can see on the slide essentially. Moving on. We have another layer of data in this system. A few years back, we developed what we call the Global Port Integrity Platform, and then have developed what we called Port Integrity Scorecards. And as you already understood, there are limitations to the anonymous data. It's anonymous. That's the first thing. It's unverified. It's just the industry. It doesn't say if this was correct or not, you know, so you can't take the data for granted. And in itself, yeah, it doesn't tell the full story. So we said, what can we do to take this to the next level? How can we have a more robust data set to understand the risks in the ports where we operate? So what we did was to basically add a few different data sources to this data set. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you have a port bribery risk. So this is data coming from the anonymous data. We identified a few indicators like large cash, severe incidents like security threats, violence, and we tried to use them to say, is this a high, medium, low bribery risk in the port based on our data? Then we forged a few partnerships. So on the right-hand side, you can see here we have a research partnership with the KLU in Germany, Kuhne Logistics University, Universidad Los Andes in Colombia, and also the University of Piraeus, who put together a team of PhD students and other researchers who helped us assess the systems and policies and tools that government authorities in ports put in place to prevent corruption. And here we decided to focus on 5 things, and this is what you have in the circle. We looked at systems for electronic exchange to minimize human interaction between the ship and the shore. We looked at the procedures in the port. When you go into the port with a vessel, are these procedures clear and transparent? We looked at anti-corruption policies, and then we looked at 2 types of reporting mechanisms, both whistleblowing and complaints and grievance mechanism. And what the researchers did was essentially to try and score and assess the port authority, customs, immigration, health, and terminal operators in 250 ports globally, and see what do they have in place, do they follow best practice, are there any gaps, and so on, and try and benchmark and use a objective or fairly objective scoring criteria to assess these port integrity commitments in across these ports. And then finally, we added 1/3 data set, which is the trace matrix, which you may be familiar with. It's just another external data source to assess bribery risk at national levels. And the idea by using these 3 data sources was to get a more robust risk assessment of challenges in the port. And then we want to show you how this looks in practice. But before we do that, Joseph.
Yes, thank you, Martin. It's quite interesting to see that this project used the data from the trace bribery matrix. I don't know if you were aware, they also presented in this roundtable series, I believe, a year and a half ago. I quite like their approach to assessment of bribery risks. I was just wondering how you guys made the decision of going with that, let's say, index to assess corruption risk at the country level compared to some of the other available options.
Yeah, that was a long discussion, but it's 3 years ago, so I can't recall all the details. But it was essentially that they had a very good focus on business risks and operational risk for business and so on. But I don't know by the back of my head exactly the reasoning, but we looked at various data sets, and we also had some external advice on data sets to use, and we ended up with this one, which has been working fine, I think. But we are also happy to hear other options from a community like this. Of course, it's not set in stone.
No, fair enough. I know the consequence of time in memory, but just pointing out that indeed the decision was based on these more business specific indicators that they handle. That clarifies a lot to me. Thank you.
Yes. So maybe in the interest of time, we can move on and look at the scorecards, because this is the output of what I just tried to explain now. I don't know, Vivek, sorry, Ignacio, do you want to show your screen for this, or what?
Yeah, definitely, I can do it. Yeah.
Do that. I'll just stop sharing, and then we can just walk you through quickly how this looks. Now you should be able to share, I think.
And it's asking me permission in Zoom. Yeah. Okay. Can you see my screen? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So this is part of our members site. We are already in a section where the port integrity scorecards are. Following the same example that we had there in a print, here we have all the countries where we have the scorecards, this research done. Let's go the one that was there, for example. It was Nigeria. And then you have all the ports for which we have a scorecards done. Let's go to Lagos, for example. And here I'm gonna go through pretty quickly, but as Martin showed you, you have 3 sections. Section A, it's all from our incident data, so different kind of indicators. Here then we have the definition for each indicator, for example, percentage of severe incidents from those. Also some calculations that we do in the backend to compare these things. These are the port integrity commitments that Martin has just talked about. If we go deeper, we have each of the agents and how were the commitments for integrity and transparency in the ports for each of those. It's all a set calculations of scores that these researchers developed, and that would give the level of risk. And finally, at the country level, this finally in the end gives you an overall port risk level. And that's how we didn't want to put absolute numbers, because as you also raised before, it's sometimes hard to compare one thing with others. So this is like a traffic light system where getting these 3 layers, one over the other, we could have at least some more information of the corruption risk in different ports. For the time being, we are covering almost 260 ports worldwide. Of course, incident data we have from about 1,300, but this one was a more specific and deep research done. So for the time being, we could cover 260 of the most important ports that we want to do have scorecards to. If there's no other question here, I remember I also had this dashboard open that I can really quickly show you. Maybe, for the sake of time, I don't gonna go a lot into that, and also because we covered it already. But this is, for example, one example of how a dashboard could look like, that the ones we are providing our members with, and to analyze different situations. So here also, this is only about the incident data. We can do, for example, if we go to Argentina, we can see how incidents change over time. We can also filter different ports. We can also see for a specific time frame what happened. And here we have the nature of the demand, that all of these graphs also serve as filters, so we can have a pretty granular data if we want to know what happened, for example, only with, I don't know, port agents. And then we can see how this changed over time, the incidents. And so now we can identify, okay, port agents, usually in this data set, demand is the most. They were dealing mainly with container and bulk. So this is kind of how we visualize data, and we help our members visualize and assess port risks. This is only regarding incident data, of course. I don't know, is there any question about the visualization of the scorecards and the incident data? If not, we can continue, and
yes, Ignacio. Just a quick question about the port integrity commitments.
Yes.
I'm not completely clear if maybe I missed it for a second there. Because as you say, so there are three data sets combined here, right? The first one is from the incident data set. The third one is provided by the matrix. The second one, especially considering that the large number of ports that you're providing information for, it sounds very difficult to collect. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, Martin may want to jump in, but as I said, we don't have scorecards for the 1,300 ports for which we have incident data. For the time being, we have scorecards for around 260 ports. Where because, of course, it took time, effort, and resources, of course, to do all of this research. So yeah, it's on our interest to keep expanding this data set. But yeah, Martin, if you want to expand a little.
Yeah, no, we've been, I mean, there's some limitations on the data you can get from ports. We've tried various things to survey the ports authorities, but we didn't get much of that. So instead, we've been looking actually what's available in public, what can you find online, and so on. And the research team have done that and documented, do they have these procedures? Do they have reporting in place and so on? Over a time of maybe about 2-3 years. That's what it took them to get this in place.
Thank you. That's what I was wondering, if it was mostly a manual work of collecting publicly available information. From experience, I know how time consuming that is, so I was quite amazed by that. Thank you. David, you have a question?
Yes. I want to ask a question concerning the data you share about Nigeria, actually. The country level bribery and corruption risk is generally high, that is common sense, actually. But I can say that the overall kind of incidents from Nigeria in terms of the port integrity commitment is, the overall is kind of moderate, does this mean that the level of incidents or the number of incidents in Nigeria is kind of lower, or then if that is yes, does that mean that are there specific actions that you think is responsible for that, why you have very kind of low incidents from the port, whereas the country, the macro level, the corruption level is generally high for the country?
Yeah, I think it's that's quite related to the work we've been doing in Nigeria for the past 10 years. So we've been working actively with the government to put in place these port integrity commitments, so anti-corruption policies and reporting frameworks and so on. And that's why they score well as well, because these things exist. And we think Nigeria is really a model for the region. And what we want to say with a data set like this for a private sector player is to say, well, you can see there are many reports, so corruption do exist. But if you look at the integrity commitments, there's something you can do about it. You can report corruption. There are policies in place that you can refer to. So you get more of a balanced picture of Nigeria as a country, that there's actually things you can do. And also when we hopefully can wrap up about our help desk, you will see that that's also another measure that you can actually take actions as a company to reduce the risk of corruption by collaborating with government and so on. And we have seen a decline in reports. I have a slide on that. We can pull that up as well. In Nigeria, it's been going down dramatically for a few years.
Yeah, because I just want to know what you think is responsible for that. Is it because of well, can you say it's partly because of your work over the years, or there is an overall kind of general, the level of corruption or the opportunity for corruption within the sector is generally lower, maybe because of the number of ships that come into Nigeria and stuff like that?
Yeah, it's hard to say exactly why, but we think the work we've been doing is one of the reasons. If you look at the authorities in the ports in Nigeria, they all have dedicated teams who deal with corruption in real time. So they investigate and do stint operations in the port, immigration, customs, port authority, and so on. And that came about a few years back, and that has been kind of a game changer, where you also have law enforcement catching people red-handed, both on the public and the private sector side. So I think they just really have stepped up on enforcement, and that has made an effect, and the public and the private sector knows about this. So I would say it's really about public sector stepping up and doing some quite ambitious work in Nigeria. But of course, many things contribute.
Thank you.
Samuel?
Yeah, quick question, whether the scorecards are actually public, because I see they're online on the website, but maybe you only have access. And then the other thing is, would you actually be willing to share your data with anti-corruption agencies if they were genuine about trying to address the problem that you have identified?
Yeah, so the data again is behind our login. So we share it with the government in Nigeria, for example. The government of Nigeria and the Anti-Corruption Academy in Nigeria use our data to assess the performance of the government. So that's why now how we do data exchange with government, but we don't publicize it. So it's the same answer as previously. We share it with anti-corruption agencies. I work in Malaysia, for example. We share that regularly with them. But again, it comes back to a risk assessment. Can we trust the partner? Will there be consequences? Because governments are different. They have good intentions and sometimes less good intentions, So there's always a risk assessment building on collaboration and trust. But the general point or approach is that we do share, because sharing is oftentimes leads to actions.
Great.
Thank you.
I thought Obi wanted to ask a question, but I don't see his hand raised anymore.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you, Martin, sorry, I cannot be seen because I'm trying to manage my internet, so that's why I can open my camera. So, this session has actually opened a lot of things, me thinking through different things. But I want to find out, in all the ports that you work in various countries, do you have your members, physically stationed in these ports, maybe acting as maybe doing one kind of supervision or the other? That's number one. Then I'm also thinking, since your data is not made public, I believe in adaptive kind of leadership, and I also see MACN as a proactive organization, who could actually, when you see adaptive challenges in corruption, you also use different adaptive measures and methodologies to approach it. What do you fear most about making your data public? Because if you want to fight corruption, it has to be transparent. And if you want to be an adaptive organization, you must take the risks. This is a whole lot of, what I'm thinking. What do you fear most about sharing your data? Because I see it on the other way around, where maybe when your data is made public, it will actually make your work more obvious and also address most of the things that are not made public in a way. This is just my thought and also a question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so in terms of members being present, we are a global network, so many companies operate across the world. We don't have mapped out exactly where everybody is based, but of course they are. That's kind of the way you get data, because they do call ports across the world, and you have port agents, supply chain partners, so you get data from many parts of the world. But we don't have members stationed in every port, so to speak. In terms of what we fear the most, I agree. We have had great successes by publicizing the data. We've seen that leads to change, but we've also had some very, very severe cases where single companies, even multinationals, their staff being threatened to be abducted, they're being threatened to be delicensed, our partner being threatened to be delicensed, being asked to publicize apologies in national newspapers. So the consequences can be very severe, depending on the country, of course. So that's why we have this more selective approach on a country-by-country basis. Because if we break the trust also with the private sector, the initiative will be dead, to be honest. It's all about trust. So we need to maintain that and make sure that private companies are comfortable reporting. And if they will end up in a situation where their staff is being threatened because they're a member of MACN, then I think the whole model of driving change will eventually fail. And that's really the assessment we're always up against. But I do agree fully that transparency is good, and we are all for that, But that's the kind of balance here we're juggling as an initiative, if that makes sense.
If I can add something small, what we sometimes do is to share it in different ways instead of sharing the raw data and the data set as such. When we need to engage with a specific authority or organization, maybe we build this kind of ad hoc visualizations where at least you cannot see the raw data, because also as the data, as we said, it's anonymous. There are certain characteristics in when they describe the demand that it could lead to investigation on who was exactly. So if you go to a port and how many tankers that exact day were there, so we had those cases. So that's why sharing raw data set, it has its challenges, as Martin described.
Obi?
Yeah, I'm okay. Thank you so much.
So to follow up to both Samuel and Obi's question potentially, because I of course need to ask this before the time runs out. In terms of collaborating with academia, it was great to see, for example, that for the scorecard you engage with scholars from different universities and in different parts of the world. So that's the kind of multi-stakeholder collaboration that we love to see for anti-corruption efforts. In terms of being able to also use this data that you have been collecting for research purposes, is there experience of that sort of collaboration? Is that something that could potentially be available? I imagine with conditions or restrictions, but could you say something about that?
Yes, definitely. We've done that over time with various researchers. And it depends, of course, again, on the type of project and country to some extent. And also if we can connect it to certain actions or change we want to see. If there is something we're working on in a new country, then of course it's really interesting for us as well to see the outcome of that research. So we do have those collaborations, but we're also a very small organization. We're 12 people. So there's a limit to what we can accept, to be honest, because everything takes time, right? So we do it, again, quite selectively when we think there is really relevance for both parties, but we're very much open for that, of course.
That's great. Thank you. We still have another 5 minutes. I don't know if there was well, we have a question. Julia, please go ahead.
Okay, I have so many questions, but I will focus in just one. What I am researching, I am researching in collective action, anti-corruption collective action, but from a different perspective. And what I wanted to understand a little bit more is what kind of assurances do you give to members that this is not going to be just integrity washing? I mean, this is something that, for instance, when you mention the UK Bribery Act and we read the guidelines, we see that, for instance, a sign of top-level commitment is the involvement on collective action initiatives. So this is something that relates to my investigation, is what kind of assurances that, of course, in repeated interactions and situations, we can have building trust, but also maintaining trust in terms of that we want to see this type of approach to MACN. And also the second one is that sometimes I look at collective action initiatives as some type of protection that members can use. In what terms? For instance, they go to a port and they say, look, I cannot pay because I am part of MACN and we cannot have this type of behavior. Otherwise, we can be penalized. But in this group, do you think that this is what happens in practice, or this is just more, an approach that I have look at when I think of collective action initiatives? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thanks for those questions. I think if you're looking at integrity washing and assurance, I think it applies on really both sides, to be honest. There's also the government sometimes and also the private sector. We need, that business is genuine about their commitment. I mean, part of it is the self-assessment and looking at their compliance standards. So that's something you could hold them accountable for. But again, that's a self-assessment. So it has some limitations. I would rather say the work we do in the countries is very hard to hide away. We didn't get to that, but we do have this non-anonymous help desk where companies report cases. So I'm in the port, I'm having a challenge with corruption right now. Can MACN and government help me? And here we can see names, I'm called the port, I've asked for help, I rejected corruption, I got the support from senior management, I got the support from my supply chain and so on. And when you have those interactions in Nigeria, in Egypt, then of course you see that this is genuine, But it's a constant battle because these companies is not one unity. You have compliance that of course like us. You have the captains that often like us. You have operations that may say, yeah, thumbs up as long as it's going well. And you may have other parts, I would say commercial people, to be very generalistic, who may see less relevance, in this and find shortcuts because companies are mainly interested in one unity, right, or one organization. So there's a constant battle, to really make sure that this is not, this is actually trickles down in the entire organization. But the help desk has really had some fantastic results. We have thousands of companies using this, and that's the result, or it's a testimony that they're actually implementing these tools we have into their standard operating procedures. It's integrated into the organization. That's really what we want to see. In terms of saying no, I think they do say no. As I say, I'm a member, and I think that's part of why they join, because they want to have a bit of a protection. I think it's good that they do that, but I also see challenges that corruption moves to somewhere else. It moves to the non-members. And that's also why we try to, of course, drive reforms, and try to look at the root causes of corruption. So in Nigeria, you look at the incident data, you look at the help desk data, and then you go to government and say, look, there's certain procedures in the port, we need to reform them, or we need to train inspectors, or we need to have a better collaboration on these things. And then we try to look at that and essentially reform the entire sector. And we see that happening. I mean, in Egypt, for example, how the government there is extremely proactive these days on this agenda and have policies in place and supporting the industry. It has been a transformative change from our perspective in what we've seen there in the past few years. And that's not for MACN members. It's for anyone going through the Suez Canal, anyone calling Egyptian ports.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. However, we kind of ran out of time. I'm sure there are a lot more questions. Actually, I left a few of my own also on my notes. In my experience, when you see this amount of questions, it's because participants really like what they are seeing and they just want to know more about it. So thank you so much, Martin, Ignacio. Again, wonderful work that you guys at MACN are working with. And thank you so much for a very insightful and very interesting presentation. I do look forward to seeing what comes next and how this continues building up. And I'm sure that also I plan to contact you directly to see if there's an opportunity to do something with the data in terms of academic analysis. Yes, but until then, thank you again, and thank you everyone for participating in today's roundtable. And I hope to see you again for the roundtable in March.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Joseph, for the invitation,
Yeah,
and
thank you,
everyone for the great
Bye.
engagement.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take good
Thank you,
care.
Martin and Ignacio.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.